Hello, and welcome to our episode about the Industrial Revolution. In the mid-1700s, an industrial revolution began in England that transformed the way work was done. Rather than making goods by hand, new machines mass-produced products, which lowered costs, increased profits, and changed the way people lived. By 1900, industrialization had spread through Europe and the United States, transforming the West into the most dominant region of the world. The effects of this revolution will pretty much create the world as we know it today. So the first thing we will look at is, why does this industrial revolution happen in England specifically? Why not in China or somewhere else in Europe? Let's think about what life was like in England before the Industrial Revolution. People were the main producers of all products. We did not have machines to do work for us, so the work was done by hand, and it was done very slowly. Before the Industrial Revolution, most Europeans worked and lived on small farming villages using inefficient methods of farming. They relied on the medieval three-field system, where they literally had three main fields that they used for planting. In one field, they would plant fall and winter plants. The second field, they planted summer crops, and the third they left unplanted. This system is ineffective, as it depleted the soil and didn't maximize the farmland. The other problem is, people weren't trying to make anything better. Everyone was content with the way things were. As a result of this system, the food that they were able to produce was always about the same every year, which means their population numbers were stagnant. You can't have more people if you're always producing the same amount of food. In the mid-1700s, new farming techniques will lead to an agricultural revolution in Europe. Scientific farming methods like crop rotation will help maximize farmland without depleting the soil, and this will increase production. Now, all of your fields will have crops growing in them instead of just 2/3 of them. They are able to plant new crops from the Americas, like corn and potatoes, that enrich the lives of many Europeans. These plants can also grow in many climates, which helps them spread all around Europe and creates less starving people. Other new inventions introduced during this time are tools like the iron plow and the seed drill. Before, plows had always been made out of wood, which was easy to break and did not last very long. Now, with the steel plow, farmers can go faster down each row and it's more cost-effective. Another thing going on during this time period is that fences start to come up around people's property. Fences will be used to protect large farms and control who has access to farmlands. This fencing is called the enclosure movement, and it will be happening all over England around the same time. As a result of the agricultural revolution, more food was made and Europe's population will increase drastically. You can see from this chart that within about 100 years, England's population will increase by about 4 million people. The country with the highest population increase will be Russia, with an increase of around 23 million people. This increase in the population means that new jobs need to be created to accommodate the growing workforce. And many of these new workers will start to move to cities to find work in industrial factories. The Industrial Revolution will begin in England for a variety of reasons. The first, and maybe the most important, was that they had the natural resources to support this. England had a large deposit of natural resources like iron and coal, which is what will be needed to fuel the factories they develop. If you didn't have those resources naturally, you would have to buy them from other countries, which is expensive and slows down your production. England also had banks and a government that encouraged trade and invention. England, starting with exploration, had become more capitalist and enjoyed a laissez-faire economy. People had been investing in joint stock companies for hundreds of years at this point, so the concept of buying into a company was something they understood. Their economy was also very stable, which allowed people to be able to invest their money rather than just save it. England also had a stable supply of resources coming in from its colonies. They would get cheap raw materials from the colonies, so the goods they made came with a very high profit rate. Then they could also sell those products back to the colonies because they usually restricted the colonies and didn't allow them to build their own factories in the first place. From 1750 to 1850, England was the most industrialized nation in the world. You can see from the picture here that many people built their factories close to coal mines so they could easily access their power source. This will bring more and more people to these locations, and you can start to see a rise in city populations. By 1850, England had 12 cities that had 100,000 people or more living there, which will make up over 50% of the population. So now that we have this technology, what will be the first profession to industrialize and mass produce their goods? The answer may surprise you. The population boom that happens because they can make more food causes a demand for more clothing. Traditional methods of textile making are very slow. You couldn't just go to a store and buy your clothes. Usually, women in your family made all of the clothes for you. They would help spin the raw material to make yarn, and then they would use a machine to weave the yarn into cloth. And then they had to sew that cloth by hand into clothes. As a result, people realize they need to be able to make clothes faster to keep up with the population increase. Here is an example of one of the first machines invented during the Industrial Revolution. It's a sewing machine. You would have to crank the handle there to get it to work, but it's still way faster than sewing by hand. While increased technology usually sounds like only good things come out of it, there are some negative effects, especially with the increase of clothing. The European demand for cotton led to a boom in cotton production and slavery in the southern United States. Remember, cotton is really only being grown in large amounts in North America and India during this time, and North America will still have slaves. When Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, manufacturing cotton cloth became easier than ever before, but it will stimulate the need for more slavery to keep up with the demand. So slavery in North America increases by about 700,000 people due to the need for cotton textiles. All of this new technology and machinery will lead to the factory system. Power-driven machines were able to produce goods very fast, and they didn't cost much money to make. Factory owners made huge profits selling mass-produced clothes that only cost them a fraction of the price to make. Just think. This is the first time in history that people will be walking down the street and they might see someone with the same shirt as them. The textile industry and the rise of the factory system led to growth of other industries and innovations as well. In the early factories, they relied on hydroelectric power to power the machines, so all early factories had to be next to rivers. Then, in 1765, a man named James Watt invents the first steam engine. Steam engines will be able to produce more power and allow factories to be built in cities near the workers, rather than wherever the river happens to be located. The next major advancement will come in the form of transportation. Now that factories had all these great products to sell, they needed a way to get them to people faster than by horse and carriage. The first new development in transportation will come in the form of the steamboat. A man named Robert Fulton will use the steam engine to power a steamboat that will increase the speed of water travel. Soon after this, the steam-powered railroad is invented, and it cuts travel time to fractions of what it had always been for most places. For example, from London to Liverpool, it would have taken you 24 hours to travel there by horse-drawn carriage. Now on the train, you can get there in 6.5 hours. If you are a business, this means that you now have a whole new market of people to sell your goods to. Not only are these railroads fast, but they also stimulate the coal industry because that's the fuel they use, and the iron industry because they have to build all of those railroad ties. Railroads begin to be constructed in alarming numbers. If you look at the map, every red line represents a railroad built between 1850 to 1880. That's only a 30-year time span. And you'll notice it's mostly only happening in Western Europe. That will be important to note for later on when we talk about European imperialism. So, by now, the 1800s, factories are becoming more commonplace. Cities are growing at an unprecedented rate. and traditional rural communities start to falter. Many of the people coming to cities to find work will work in iron and coal factories. By 1800, England will make more iron and coal than any other nations in the world combined. The chart to the left shows their iron production over a 100 or so year time span. The next major advancement will come with the development of steel. A man named Henry Bessemer invented a cheap process for making steel, which of course is stronger than iron. Steel allows engineers to design taller buildings, powerful machines, and longer bridges. Just think, before this time, there were no skyscrapers because if you built a building more than maybe 3 or 4 stories tall, it was at risk for falling down because of poor support systems. So this is where the world starts to look a little bit more like you probably know it today. The Industrial Revolution sparks the invention of other amazing forms of technology. We gain new forms of communication like the telegraph and the telephone, business machines like the typewriter and cash register, and great medical improvements like vaccines. Just to give you an example of how fast this technology is coming out, the first steam locomotive was built in 1830, and by 1903, we have our first airplane. Once we have the tools, humans have made so many things possible. England will not be the only country to capitalize on industrial change. The other major country to embrace this revolution will be Germany. Germany also has large supplies of coal and iron ore, so naturally they are able to build more easily than countries who have to purchase their iron and ore from other places. The Germans will also build a large network of railroads and factories to boost their industrial ambitions. One of the main differences between England and Germany during this process will be that instead of trying to be the commercial center of the world, Germany is building weapons and trying to build up its military. It's interesting that while they both had access to the same types of materials, what they choose to do with those materials is very different. By the mid-1800s, Germany will have one of the world's most modern militaries, and this is one of the reasons they are able to play such a big role in World War I. The Industrial Revolution also spreads to America. The major negative, of course, is that slavery increases due to the rise of textile mills and the demand for cotton. But now, more textile factories are going to be built in the North rather than being shipped all the way to England, especially after America gained its independence. The North will have all of the factories and industry, while the South produces all of the raw materials. That's one of the big reasons the South lost the Civil War. They didn't have the railroad network to keep supplying their troops, while the North had a pretty easy path to getting their troops more supplies because they could send it by railroad. After the Civil War is over, American industry will boom, and the U.S. will become world leaders in railroad production, oil, steel, and electricity. During this time, many companies will emerge to form large corporations. And you see the development of monopolies, where one company has total control over the market. The US will later create laws that will prevent this from happening, but for a while, most of the money made in the US went to 4 to 5 big families who basically were able to influence most everything happening in the country. You'll learn more about this in American history next year. So, to wrap up everything we've talked about today, from 1700 to 1900, revolutions in agriculture, industry, transportation, and communication changed Western Europe and the United States. This will give tremendous economic and military power to those who industrialize, and will make very weak the countries that did not. Industry will also have numerous negative effects on working conditions. While all this new technology is cool, the average person's quality of life actually decreases. There is no minimum wage, so companies would pay their workers hardly any money at all, making them totally dependent on working and unable to leave and find new work. There were no work hour restrictions, so people usually worked 12 to 14-hour days, or however long the sun was up. There were no child labor laws, so when families couldn't afford to live without more money, they sent their children to work in the factories, where they did very dangerous work. There's also no health insurance or guarantee of employment, so if you got hurt and broke your arm, they would just fire you and hire someone else. So while there was great advancements in technology, there were definite declines of social advancements. This concludes our lesson on the Industrial Revolution. Thanks for watching.